It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our archives are free at Spreaker.com. Do a live show there every Friday night, 8 p.m. That's where we put up the new content on Friday nights to the weekly new content. And I put up repeats every night. There's a chat room. You get an email notification when we put up content. And if you go up there and look up Doug Poppa, you'll find our guest today, Doug Poppa from the Doug Poppa podcast. He's also contributed to the Baltimore Post-Examiner for articles and stuff. And we've had him on about the Shane Valentine pimps and judges. Then we had him on about the fascinating story. This guy was involved with the Cult Awareness Network and went undercover with those kidnappers. That's an incredible story, too. Go back and check that one out. But today we're going to be talking about the October 1st shooting, which Doug Poppa did a lot of investigative work on the October 1st shooting there in Las Vegas at Mandalay Bay. Mr. Doug Poppa, are you there?
Good morning, Ed. Nice to be with you.
Hey, great to have you back, man. Remind the audience, though, who is Doug Poppa?
Well, I started my law enforcement career, law enforcement bug, back in Brooklyn, New York. I was an auxiliary police officer for 2 years with the NYPD. I went into the Army. I was a military policeman for 3 years, got out. I was a police officer in Herndon, Virginia. I left there, transferred over to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office in Northern Virginia, same place, and I was there for 12 years. And as you know from the previous show, I lost my, I was a detective criminal investigator and lost my job in 1992 when I exposed that the sheriff's office and the prosecutor's office had withheld exculpatory information in an attempted murder case, and the guy was released from jail and found not guilty at the retrial. Came out to Vegas after that. Well, before I came out to Vegas, I got involved with an FBI investigation. They requested I go undercover, and I think you talked about it at the introduction, and that was the DuPont kidnapping attempt, him and the guy and his wife, and I went undercover and had the Cult Awareness Network was involved with that, and some ex-cops anyway. That came to a conclusion in 1992, and then I came out to Vegas, was out near Vegas since 1993, and started as an investigator at the MGM Grand, and was over there for 5 years. Became director of security at the Silverton Casino. Was there 4 years, and then 10 years at the Riviera, director of security and surveillance. Lost my job over there when I found out they had rigged a slot machine, and they wouldn't pay out a certain amount jackpot. And then I was canned. Then I was blackballed from the casino business. And then I was with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security out at McCarran Airport for a year with the TSA, and then 62 came around because of my back and other problems. I retired and I'm on Social Security. So since that time, like I said, I wrote 5 years for the Baltimore Post-Examiner as an investigative journalist, and I started my own podcast in 2019, and I still cover a lot of the stories, updates that I wrote for them, and I'm still a contributor. They still post my links and stuff on their online paper when they think it's national attention and stuff. So that's what I do. That's what I do on my retirement.
So, Doug, 2017, October 1st, I remember when I first heard about it, it wasn't on the news yet. People were talking about it on Facebook at first. And then I started seeing some things on the news, and immediately I looked up the scanner, the Las Vegas police scanner, and it was, what were you doing that, and how did you hear about it?
Well, I always monitor the police scanner at the time, the LVMPD channels, which you can't do anymore because after the massacre, a couple of months, I think it was the following year, Joe Lombardo, who was a sheriff at the time, turned off the public access to the public. The news media still have the radios, but the public can no longer access the communications between the patrol officers and stuff with the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. But that was not in effect during the massacre. And the scanner was on, was a Sunday night, and I was actually on the phone with the retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officer who I knew. And then all of a sudden I was getting a call from somebody else and said something's hitting on the strip. And then I turned the radio up and I heard everything almost immediately since it started. And it was interesting, Ed, is that I had Stephen Paddock's name that night before 12 o'clock because on the radio, Levi Hancock, who was the lone SWAT guy that made that ad hoc team and went into the room an hour and 5 minutes later, after they getting ready to clear the room, he got on the radio and he was picking up ID. And he says, you may want to have somebody go by this address in Mesquite. So he put the whole address out.
So did I.
Yeah, so
I was there too, man.
I went to the assessor site and I put the address in, and it came back with the owner as Stephen Paddock. So I was on the phone with this retired friend of mine who's a cop, and I said, I think that may be the shooter, but I didn't know 100%. So that's how I got involved in it. I was listening to all the traffic that night. I stayed up all the way till the next morning, taking notes. I had the traffic recorded with the recorder, and I wrote the first story for the Baltimore Post-Examiner the next day, and just continued with, I think there's pretty close to 165. I wrote about 165 articles, more than any other single journalist in the country on the Las Vegas massacre. So that's how it started.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was chaos on the police scanners.
It's insane.
Shooting down at the M, up at Bellagio. It was just chaos. And they shut down 215. They shut down the 15. Right. I was living in Green Valley Ranch. They shut down the entrance to the 215 down in Green Valley Ranch. And the next day, I kept my kid home from school. It was chaos.
Yes. Well, nobody knew at the time. That, the FBI came out within hours with Lombardo and said Aaron Rouse was the special agent in charge of the Las Vegas field office, and he came out and said there's no nexus to terrorism. And how do you know that? You don't know that. But, they put that out, and everybody made a big deal about it. That's just the normal BS that they do. There's no way you could know that it was not involved with terrorism, or there was no accomplices or anything like that. But, it was a mess. And I was fortunate enough, Ed, to have a lot of contacts on the police department with current and retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officers, including high-ranking police officials who've spoken to me over the years and given me information. And then I also had contacts at MGM Resorts International within their organization from people that I knew years ago, and then other people that just contacted me. So I was breaking one story after another. And like I say, 98% of the stories that we broke at the Baltimore Post-Examiner on the massacre were never picked up by the local media. So it was, and I did that consistently for years. And I still, I talk about it. I did some podcast I did about a year ago and stuff, and I did talk about more stuff on there and follow-ups and stuff like that. So.
What do you think about the police response? Because one of the things that really, when you saw the news, the local news the next morning, the stagehands were talking about how they had to shuttle people on those yellow wheelbarrows, to get people out because the cops weren't allowing EMS and the ambulances to go inside the fairgrounds.
That's correct.
Yeah, what do you make of that mess?
Well, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department police officers who were working that inside the Route 91 festival where the people ended up getting killed, the incident commander there was Lieutenant Ray Spencer, and there was I don't have any notes in front of me, so everything right now is coming off the top of my head. But there was a lot of police officers assigned to that, just because it was a 3-day festival. And I can say, and I wrote stories on this, that because they were getting slammed for this, and I slammed the police department and some other stuff, mostly the leadership. I'll talk about that later. But the police officers who were there that night saved a lot of lives doing first aid, and they transported a lot of people in vehicles and police vehicles and took them to the hospital and saved a bunch of lives. But yes, and that was one of the things that was critical of even around midnight. Believe it or not, after the shooting the shooting had stopped at between 10:15 and 10:16. Even at midnight, I did a story on this. The fire department still didn't want to go into the incident site. Yeah. They were telling police officers to pick up ambulances and then drive the people down to the command center on the south of the strip. I believe it was the South Central Area Command, and that was well over an hour and a half after the shooting had stopped. So that didn't get too much attention in the news, but a lot of people questioned that as well. The shooting stopped. Was the fire department afraid to go in there after the shooting stopped? But the police officers who were there, I did commend them in several stories. They did do a good job. You hear them on the radio. We're running. They were making tourniquets out of shirts and stuff. They didn't have any medical equipment. What got with this is. And I did stories slamming Lombardo, and then his undersheriff at the time was Kevin McMahill, who's now the sheriff, because Lombardo, ran for governor, and then McMahill ran for sheriff 2 years ago and got in. But, I was in the casino business for 20 years, and I was director at 2 different properties. And back, and I don't remember what year it was, but the FBI wanted security directors out here to get a national security clearance, which means you had to do like a big background investigation and everything like that. A lot of directors didn't want to do it because I guess didn't want to put all their personal information there. I had a security clearance when I was in the military, so it didn't bother me. So I put it in and I ended up getting the national security clearance. The reason why they wanted us to do that is because they couldn't talk to us about or attend any of these meetings about, intelligence, about maybe possible threats on the strip and stuff. So I did get the background clearance, national security clearance from DHS, and went to a lot of these briefings and stuff that were done by DHS and the FBI in Las Vegas, about possible terrorist attacks and, what's going on in the terrorist world and stuff like that, counterintelligence information. And also they were publishing, DHS and the FBI were publishing bulletins that were sent out to I know for a fact that was sent out to every casino in Las Vegas. Every director got them, even the ones that didn't get this national security clearance. And they all said that, that it's a soft target, and we're targets. For years this was going on. And the casinos didn't heed it, and the police department, because some of the people talking at these seminars were, police officers from intelligence and stuff like that. But when this thing hit, they weren't prepared for it. And I did many stories on this. Ed, I don't know if you listeners know, they didn't even have, the police department did not even have a mass casualty incident plan in place. They didn't do that until after the massacre, when they did their after-action briefing and they said this is what we did wrong. Police officers at the time were not allowed to carry their rifles. They had to have them locked in the trunk of the cars. So a lot of these guys that were inside the Route 91 festival had to run to their vehicles, which were parked sometimes a block or two away. And this is all in their own words. They wrote reports on it, and they had to go get their rifles out and then run back. It was a freaking disgrace. Is the police department not being prepared? What made it even worse, Ed? And I don't know if your listeners know, but in 2014, there was an incident over Mandalay Bay. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was up in the hotel. And one of the housekeepers went in the room and found all the stuff. And he had weapons in the room, including a bolt-action .308 rifle. I believe it was an AR-15 and some handguns, a silencer. And one of the rifles was on the floor, pointed towards the window down at the Strip. So, of course, she calls security. And then the FBI gets involved. Metro gets involved. They end up locking him up. He was a convicted felon. And he said he was going to go shooting somewhere or something like that. Now, that incident happened in 2014 inside one of the towers of the Mandalay Bay. Now, with that, and then all the information coming from the FBI and DHS over the years, they weren't prepared. Neither was the police department and or the casinos. MGM Resorts International were the owners of Mandalay Bay. And then, the first Route 91 festival started in 2014. And then they had one in 2015. And they had one in 2016. And then, of course, 2017 was the Las Vegas massacre. And they didn't have a SWAT counter snipers standing by at any of those events, even though they knew that a high-rise tower could possibly be a nest for a sniper. And what makes it even worse, and I broke all these stories, okay? And one of the stories I broke after the massacre was, and it flipped people out, and it's also on my podcast. I first broke the two stories of the Baltimore Post-Examiner. When the Sahara Hotel closed in 2011, because they were going to redo it, and another company took it over, was going to come out with a different name. Long story short, the police department used the hotel as a training site, and this is all in my podcast. And in 2011, the FBI flew their hostage rescue team to Las Vegas, and they put up targets in the high-rise and in the parking garages, silhouettes. And two FBI hostage rescue team snipers on this helicopter shot the targets. Okay? Now, the purpose of it was to show that you could take out a sniper from an elevated position in a hotel high-rise or on top of a garage with snipers in a helicopter. Okay? That was concealed from the public until I broke the story. And then I broke a follow-up on that 2 years ago on my podcast, because believe it or not, when the Baltimore Post-Examiner published my first story, that FBI, MGMRI knew sniper attack possible years before the massacre, the editor just pulled up just a picture of the hostage rescue, one of the hostages, just randomly to use on the story. Well, 2 years ago, I'm on the internet, always researching stuff, and I find this promotional video that was put out by the FBI years ago for the hostage rescue team. And in that video, there's an 8-second clip of the same helicopter that we had the photograph on with the palm trees in the background, which we didn't know at the time was inside the Sahara. And you see that it's hovering inside the Sahara Hotel. And they're firing the guns, and you could see the targets. And I broke that story on my podcast. The first two were in the Baltimore Post-Examiner. But back then when that happened, I was still director of security. And I used to go to these meetings every month called the Las Vegas Chiefs Association. And I missed one back in 2011. And I heard that Sheriff Doug Gillespie was the sheriff at the time. And people were saying that, the FBI did this operation, this training exercise, and that the helicopter was hovering off the Las Vegas Strip, and they were firing guns, and Gillespie didn't know about it and everything like that. Well, that turned all out to be true. And to enforce this, when I did my first podcast on this about it, rehashing the two stories on the Baltimore Post-Examiner, I obtained from a LVMPD police officer a memo that was put out in 2011 describing this training exercise. And I broke that on my podcast. And you can go back and look at it. It's titled, like I said, NGMRI FBI New Sniper Attack Possible Years Before the Massacre. So, all this stuff's going on, and they were totally unprepared, the leadership of the police department, that nobody knew, nobody figured out of the box when they were doing this plans for any of these Route 91 festivals, that, hey, the Route 91 festival is surrounded by high-rise towers. Mandalay Bay, New York across the street, the Tropicana. Maybe we should have counter snipers standing by because maybe we'll have a sniper attack. When they were being told by the FBI and the Homeland Security for years, and I documented this in a podcast that I did 2 years ago about that the massacre, the leadership wasn't prepared for it. It's an hour long. And I read all the stuff that the FBI was telling directors and the police for years, that, you need to be aware that lone shooters or terrorists can attack music festivals. It specifically said that, other events in Las Vegas, and nobody heeded any of that stuff. And we end up with this crazy guy, Stephen Paddock, up in the room, firing down for over 10 minutes, unimpeded. Nobody ever fired back at him. And all those people, 58 people, died that night, and then 2 people died a year or 2 later from the wounds they received. So 60 people are dead.
Are you aware that that active shooter drill that they had at St. Rose Dominican Hospital, everyone had to sign an NDA, but there was a lawsuit because some of these nurses were held at gunpoint by the cops?
I heard about it. Yeah, I didn't really look into it that much, but yes, that's true. That did happen.
Yeah, another bizarre. It's just so weird. Well, another thing too, we might have to do 2 shows, okay? Because there's just so much content to get into here. But what struck me too is that night, shortly after the shooting stopped, they were already talking about bump stocks on the news. Do you know why that could be?
I didn't hear it that night. I heard it. Well, I'll tell you why. Yeah. There was talk within the police department, and it's on video when they released all these videos that Lombardo went to court to stop the press and the public from getting the body cam videos and stuff, right. And he lost it. And the attorneys for the newspapers, I think it was the LVRJ Journal and the Los Angeles Times, and they end up losing in court, and that's why we got all the body cam footage. But cops that night were saying that on body cam footage later on, because we didn't know that night. So, the cops talk. They're saying, I remember one cop was on there saying it wasn't an automatic weapon. He was using some type of bump stock. It wasn't fast enough. So that word was spreading. So that possibly how it got out. And then, of course, within the next couple of days, it was, they went in and people started leaking information. And then we found out that he was using most of them. He didn't fire all the guns he had in the room. He fired some of them. But they were all loaded up. The clips were ready to go, and he wasn't reloading. He was just picking up rifles that were loaded and stuff and firing out the freaking window for a little over 10 minutes. The firing started at 10:05, and between 10:15 and 10:16 is when the last shots were fired. And I believe it came out that he committed suicide within his last shot. For whatever reason, he just figured he knew damn well there's no way he was going to get out of that freaking room. I mean, you're firing out of a window. Everybody knew. And all these, I'm going to tell you something, and what was disgusting about this, even to this day, there's still these BS nonsense, conspiratorial nonsense that's out there. Remember, 58 people, 60 people lost their lives, almost 500 were wounded, and all this stuff was coming out. I wasted so much freaking time. People were giving me cell phone videos that were altered. There was a helicopter, gunships were firing down at the people. There was terrorists were rappelled out of the window to escape. All this BS. There was no helicopter gunship. There was no Mossad agents. There wasn't a hit on a Saudi prince that went bad. All this freaking nonsense. Even to this day, there's people saying there was 3 females registered to the room. They were accomplices. I'll tell you, I broke this story also. That's how that came out. Because every time I heard a rumor, I was dispelling a lot of these rumors that were out there. And what happened with that was, to this day, there are people, and some guy was even talking about it on a podcast a couple of months ago, and somebody called me up and said, why is he still talking about these 3 women in the room? I said, listen, there was no 3 women in the room registered with Paddock. That was a mistake. And I broke that in stories for the Baltimore Post-Examiner and also on my podcast. That night it was hectic, Ed. The officers, some of the police officers responded to the command center inside the Mandalay Bay security and surveillance rooms, okay? It was hectic. Nobody really knew what the hell was going on in the surveillance room. It was totally, I did stories on this, and I got the videos in there. And how that came about was one of the officers, and you actually see it when these videos came out on the police body cam videos, he's asking the security guy, who's registered to the room? And then the guy's looking, and he's saying, well, there's like 3 females, and there's this guy and this, that. He was combining the previous guest to this guy. And then later on, the officer is talking on the phone to the command center. And he says, well, I already told you before who was in the room. And so he's asking this other guy, who's in the room? The guy says, oh, it was a mistake. Those are the previous guests. The guest in that room right now is Stephen Paddock. And that's what he's telling them. So a lot of the people didn't know that until I exposed it. So the word got out that these 3 people, and it was a big story, conspiracy. See, who were these 3 people, the 3 females in the room with Paddock? There were no, listen, public, there were no 3 females registered to the room with Stephen Paddock. There was no helicopter gunship firing down, shooting people in some Las Vegas Massacre. There were no terrorists along the Las Vegas Strip working with Paddock. Stephen Paddock was the lone shooter. I was the first one to break that story.
People Doug, I lost so many friendships.
People don't want to hear. One of the first things that came out, even when I was talking to the cop, when we were listening to, you had the radio, and I had the scanner on, you could hear the shots. And one of the first things that, even he says, but, it's got to be like maybe one guy, because you had the break in the firing. So if there were multiple shooters, why would you have a break in firing? In other words, when he transferred from the one room to the other, and then he was picking up different rifles and shooting them, there's a break in the shooting. Now, if there were multiple shooters, they'd all be firing continuously. Even when one's reloading and picking up the rifles, the shots would still be, because that was the first thing. Anyway, I worked on this for years. And like I said, almost over 160 stories for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. Also on my podcast about this. Stephen Paddock was the lone shooter. There was nobody else in the room. He committed suicide. We saw the body cam video when the entry team finally went in an hour and 5 minutes later. There was no cover-up. All the stuff that people were talking about, that the Paddock's body was actually a dummy, and there were crisis actors in the, what freaking people, what nutcases.
People would tell me
Rock 91 were crisis actors, and, disgusting freaking nonsense even to this day. So
people would tell me to interview the cab driver. It was on YouTube. Find the cab, because, he was playing recordings of the gunfire. It was just chaos, But people back then, we don't remember how bad it was back in 2017 with disinformation on Facebook. I guess was the big focus back in those days, and just how much crap was surrounding this story.
There was even and I worked a lot with, God rest her soul, she passed away, Catherine Lombardo, no relation to Sheriff, now Governor Lombardo. She was one of the first attorneys that filed one of the first lawsuits against the casino. She was defending some of the victims, the victims' families, and stuff like that. And she actually, some of my stories that I broke from the Baltimore Post-Examiner were actually part of the court record, because I exposed a lot of stuff. Catherine unfortunately passed away from cancer. She never lived to see the settlement go in there. But I was on Fox News with her. We did some radio interviews together. and stuff like. She's a California attorney and stuff. Anyway, she passed away. And this is all out there. It's almost everything that I've done is it's either on the Baltimore Post-Examiner online website. If you go to Doug Poppa Archives, you see every freaking story I wrote for them. And then, of course, my podcasts and stuff. But, they're still out there. There was some guy just a couple of weeks ago on this podcast saying, it was helicopter gunship that called all those people. These people, they're freak. They're insane.
They also too that the woman who had gone to an altercation at the concert and said, "Oh, my cousins are going to come back here and shoot everybody up," and they take that little tiny clip and say, "Oh, she was warning them about the shooter."
And even that was debunked later on. Like the girl that she told it to said, "No, I wasn't really right." You go back and look at it on there, but they take this little stuff because were there mistakes made? Yes. Should have the police department been more prepared for an event like this, an incident like this, a mass shooting like this? Yes. They were not. Was the casino put on notice for years that you should take security measures to prevent a lone shooter or something? Yes. They weren't checking baggage. And there's all this stuff came out immediately after. You had all these so-called experts and all these network newses saying, "Oh, no, he was in an elevator with the bellman, and the bellman was responsible." Well, that's all nonsense. Let me tell you something, people, okay? In a casino, okay, the bellman has a cart, and we saw all the stuff that Paddock was bringing in with the bellman. They made a big deal about it, okay? He's in the service elevator, and people always in the service elevator with the bellman. There is nothing freaking unusual about that. The bellman takes your luggage, piles it on a bell cart, and uses the service elevator because they're not allowed to use the public elevators for two reasons. One, you can get somebody hurt with those big carts, and two, the guest elevators are a lot smaller than the service elevators. Service elevators are made larger for bell carts and room service carts and linen carts and all that type of stuff. And if a guest says, "Can I go with you? Or you bring my stuff up?" Yes. The bellman will let you go in the back of the house in the service elevator. But Paddock didn't go into the service elevators alone. On other times, he was using the guest elevator, and that was proven on video. So they were making a big deal about, well, the bellman was helping them bring the guns in. The bellman had no freaking idea. You don't search people's luggage and say, "What's in that bag over there? Do you have a gun in there?" The bellman's packing the luggage. And, we have
the SHOT Show.
Here.
Well, Doug, we got the SHOT Show there. The people come with the cases of guns all the time.
There's conventions in every hotel, even when I was in Riviera. And these people that attend these shows, the amount of stuff that they bring in, boxes for displays and stuff. So there's nothing unusual about somebody rolling in a lot of bags and stuff, but they had to amplify that and make it look like it was some conspiracy and the bellman was involved. And I said, get me on one of these shows. And I was to Tucker Carlson twice with Catherine Lombardo, and we were talking about the SWAT response. The SWAT team was told to respond to the South Central Area Command, which was 2 miles down from the Mandalay Bay. Why was that done? But Levi Hancock didn't go there. He was the first SWAT guy on the Mandalay Bay. They were doing training or something at night or something, and he heard what was going on, and he did what he should have done. He responded to where he heard the shooter was, and he was the one that put this ad hoc team together of K-9 officers and patrol officers, and entered the room at 11:20, I think was when they entered the room, and did the breach into the room. And just when he was getting ready to go in, another SWAT team or officer arrived, and that was the guy that had the accidental discharge in the room. And then they made a big conspiracy thing about that. Oh, the guy he shot Paddock and all this. It was an accidental freaking discharge. There's some video that I produced, that I put in my podcast about a year or two ago, where afterwards you hear Hancock talking to the SWAT guy. I think his name was O'Donnell, and last name, and he says you had an AD, and he goes, yeah. When they went in the room and they had to breach the adjoining room, okay, they did the entry into 32-135, and then they had to breach 134 because the adjoining door was shut. And you got to remember, in the hotel, and people make big deals about this because they don't know what they're talking about. When you have those adjoining rooms in a hotel, there's no doorknob on the adjoining room door on the other side, the guest side. So that guest can't really never open up the door. The handle's on the other room. So they couldn't get into 134, so they did another explosive breach. And just when he did the breach is when O'Donnell had the accidental discharge. Not a big deal. Things like this happen. Nobody got shot. They made a big deal. But I was the first one to break that story.
There was an accidental discharge about a week later on Fremont Street by a cop. So, that's very common. What do we know about?
I'm going to say it's common, but it's not unusual to have an accidental discharge, and then people made the conspiracy about it that he shot Paddock and it was a cover-up. Let me put that, and I said this on a podcast. I was on radio shows for years. I'm talking about it. I said, listen, if Joe Lombardo, if a SWAT officer killed Stephen Paddock, the worst mass shooter in modern American history, the largest homicide investigation in the history of Las Vegas, don't you think that Lombardo would have had that SWAT officer on every freaking news channel, the man who killed the worst mass shooter? Paddock shot himself, okay? And there is evidence of that. There's no evidence that anybody shot him. And then, okay, people say, well, they escaped. Okay, let me tell you this real quick, okay? How did they escape if they were in the room with Paddock? Because you got to remember, he put the L bracket on the fire door closest to his room, so nobody could open up the door, with force. They going in, but to prevent them from just opening the doorknob and going in. So nobody came up and went down those stairs. In the hallway, when the shooting started, and I did multiple stories on this, you had the security operations manager armed for the Mandalay Bay, and at least 2 armed bike officers that were on that floor, and the maintenance supervisor was in the elevator core. So if somebody came out of that room, somebody was seen. Where did they go? They would have to go down the hall, go to the elevator core to go. Nobody exited the room. And how do we know? Because I was requesting from Metro at the time the lock interrogation reports for the door locks, which are all electronic locks. We had them over at the Riviera. Different companies have different things, but basically it's the same thing. Every time a door is opened or closed or a key goes in and out, it's registered into a little computer on the door or through a mainframe if it's hardwired down to a system. But either way, you do lock interrogation reports. We do them all the time when a guest says, hey, I fell asleep and I woke up and all my stuff's gone. Well, you do a lock interrogation, and then you could find out if anybody went into the room, if the room was accessed, and then you back it up with video that if you have it. Or we didn't have video in the halls at the Riviera, but we had video near the elevator core. So long story short, I kept saying the lock. I said this on the Tucker Carlson show. I said I want to see what the lock interrogation reports are going to show, because if the lock interrogation reports show that those locks were deadbolted before the firing started, and the deadbolts never came off those doors until the police breached. Okay, the deadbolt was on. Nobody could have come out of that room. Well, lo and behold, they finally released the lock interrogation reports with the rest of the stuff that the court ordered them to do later on by court order. And when I looked at the lock interrogation reports, sure as hell, it was I don't have it in front of me, but a couple of minutes before he started firing, he throws the deadbolt on 134 and 135. And what people don't understand, if you're not in the hotel business, the only way you can throw a deadbolt is the guest inside the room. You can't throw a deadbolt if you're outside the room and you just close the door regularly. That's not the deadbolt. Only the person in the room could throw the deadbolt, okay? Or security with the master if they want to lock out a room. And that would show up on the lock interrogation report. Well, the lock interrogation report showed that, like I said, that the deadbolts were thrown before the murders, before he fired out the window, Paddock, okay? And then and I did a big story on this for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, because people said, well, it wasn't. The lock interrogation report shows the deadbolts were thrown, and they never came off right when they went. Now, when they did the breach on the door, they blew the 2 double doors open, and I blew up that video right after they went in, and you could actually see the deadbolt and open, in other words, engaged, sticking out of the door, which means when they put the explosive device on 32-135, the deadbolt was thrown. So nobody came out of that room. They'd say, okay, what about 134, the adjoining room? Well, there's crime scene photographs that they released. And when you blow them up, you could see that the deadbolt latch is turned to the right, which means the deadbolt was secure, and that's corroborated through the lock interrogation report for 32-134. So nobody could have come out of that room. There was nobody in the room with Paddock when he started firing. Paddock was in there alone. He committed suicide. They went in. The deadbolts were engaged when they blew the doors, and he's dead in the room, and we saw that on the body cam video. And all these nutcases that are out there saying, oh, that video, that body cam video of the entry team, it's all altered, and it's a cover-up. Get a freaking life, people. Okay, get a life.
Oh, yeah, they were saying stuff like the guns would melt and the spent shells would cause fires inside the room. It was just the suspended logic. People were so traumatized by this, they were just coming up with these crazy things. And it was Laura Loomer who came up with that whole thing with the helicopter, with the Arab Emirates, and something about how they owned the Four Seasons, and the Four Seasons owned some floors in the Mandalay Bay.
They did. That was true. The upper levels of the Mandalay Bay, where the Four Seasons Hotel was owned by, and I don't remember the name, it was one Arab guy, but also was owned by the guy that owns, can't remember the computer guy, okay? There was but there were all multiple owners in that. And then the people started coming out with these crazy theories that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was up there and there was going to be an attack on him, and this shooting was a cover. Okay, I talked to, I can't tell you, I talked to let's put it this way, a source within Metro. Now, when the Crown Prince or the Vice President or the President or any high-level dignitaries come to Las Vegas, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department are notified that they're there. And many times, especially if it's like the Crown Prince and stuff, or Vice President, they have detectives assigned with the Secret Service details when they follow these people around. And I was said there was no Crown Prince in Las Vegas at that night of the shooting. It was not an attempted assassination on him, and it's all freaking nonsense. But people are still out there, Ed.
And Laura Loomer now has a huge career. At the time, she was a flake and a nut that was getting kicked out of press conferences, going to the security guard's house in the middle of the night. A crazy woman.
Well, I'm not a fan of hers. She's the stuff that she talks is just off the freaking wall. But, she did do one thing right is that she did get under Lombardo's skin at the press conference because she did get information that when he said that the check-in date with Paddock when this day and it was like 5 days before, and she did get a hold of that, and and that's when he knew she was going to expose that, and that's when he told her, he says, sit down, we don't do this, stop asking your question. And then he turned around to the reporter and he says, what do you want to say? And the other reporter said, yeah, well, it was in this time. But she did have that information, so I give her credit for that. But all this other conspiracy stuff and all this other nonsense, it's all freaking nonsense. I did most of my work when I started writing the stories was to debunk the nonsense that was out there, and I did, but concentrate on the failure of the police department, their response that night, because they were not prepared for this. Like I said, they should, and the casino also, they should have measures. And matter of fact, I left the industry in 2012. But right after I did a story, one of the presidents of the Las Vegas Chiefs Association, Security Chiefs Association, he said that at some time in the future, you can rest be assured that large bags will be going through screening processes at major strip hotels. Now, whether that, is it effect on some of the hotels, I don't know, but I do know one thing right now, and I was told by some people, and I'm not going to mention the corporations on some of these hotels, is that they're telling me, they said, Doug, if somebody wanted to bring the guns in that Paddock had, the amount of guns, they could still do it to this day. And a matter of fact, I'll say this, okay? If there's some news investigative, magazine, whatever you want to call it, that wants to conduct an audit, maybe you should try doing what Steve, not committing, not bringing loaded weapons in, but see how many weapons you can get into one of these casinos, these big ones on the Strip, and then do a video on it. Maybe that will shake them up, because I did hear that to this day, matter of fact, since the murders, a lot of these casinos have reduced some of their security force. Now, some of them did do some good things, and MGM did do good things. They started their emergency response team. And I did a story on this that allegedly was in place that night at the Mandalay Bay. They had it, but where were they? I did a story. Where was the Mandalay Bay? They're like special security officers who are armed and stuff and trained to respond to, mass shootings and active shooters, and stuff like that. They do have that now in some of the Strip properties. But MGM supposedly had that the night of the massacre, and I did a story. I said, where was Mandalay Bay's emergency response team the night of the massacre? And, they got all crazy when I did the story and stuff. But it was just being unprepared and being lazy and saying nothing like this could ever happen, but for years, Ed. And it's in that podcast that I did about the training and stuff, and the SWAT training with the helicopter, and all the information that was coming out, and the bulletins that I talk about and discuss in the one podcast, that they were all put on notice for years. That it could be a lone shooter, an active shooter, or a terrorist attack occurring in or outside of a Las Vegas Strip hotel, because of what Las Vegas is a target. As a matter of fact, there was magazines years ago. One was called, I can't remember the names of them. There was two, and they're terrorist magazines, and they published them in Arabic, and they published them in English. And they were actually said in there, and I talked about this on podcast, they talk about Las Vegas. They said, the infidels are in Las Vegas, and, they should be attacked. And there was even a news broadcast, I think, before the attack, that talked about that one of the, I think it was ISIS, that was making comments, or one of the suggestions that, Las Vegas was a target and stuff. And then it came out, there were ISIS terrorists and all along the Strip that were involved with Paddock, and he was, turned into an ISIS. All freaking nonsense. None of that evidence exists. There's not. People just can't accept the fact that some crazy guy got all these guns into the hotel, which he did. He brought them up there. We know they were his guns. We saw the interviews with the gun shop owners where he bought some of those guns. We saw the interviews where he was going some of these rangers, the gun rangers, firing these weapons and training. Mary Lou Danley, that was another conspiracy thing with her. Yeah, it was his girlfriend. She helped him load magazines because they used to go shooting and stuff. But Stephen Paddock was the lone shooter. Okay, that's what I did on my work from my sources, and what I did looking at other stuff. And I was the first one to say that in the story. I think the title for the Baltimore Examiner story was "Stephen Paddock was the poster boy for lone wolf terrorism." And everybody went crazy when I did. Oh, you're a liar. You're working for the government. Yeah. I don't work for anybody.
I got all that stuff too. Listen, we're almost out of time. I've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to have you come back, and we're just going to talk about Paddock, okay? Mm-hmm. But when you say that Paddock was a crazy guy, we know he was a crazy guy because he won a lawsuit saying that those video poker machines made him go crazy. We know he's crazy. You're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, I heard about it. I didn't look too much into it because the thing with me is, I'm not, when I do these stories, I'm not too concerned about, I'm an ex-cop, okay? I'm never concerned too much about the person who did the shooting. They obviously did the shooting. They're obviously deranged. No normal person would do this, okay? I'm more concerned with the police on why they go after and go after murderers, how they acted, how they responded. That's what I do because I'm an ex-cop, and it did tick me off. Because the LVMPD should have been more prepared because they were put on notice for years, especially when they were doing the planning for the Route 91 festival starting in 2014. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to sit in there and look around and say, okay, guys, here's the Route 91 festival. Let's look up. Like I said earlier, Tropicana over here, New York over there, Mandalay Bay over there, Luxor, MGM Grand Cross Street. Wow. We're surrounded by high-rise towers. Maybe there could be an incident where somebody would shoot out the window. And lo and behold, in 2014, they got that. His name was Kai Dunbar, I think his name was. They got the incident with the guns in Mandalay Bay Tower. And that didn't even say, maybe we have these outside events. We should, just in case. As a matter of fact, real quick before you go, I was talking to, I can't tell you what I was talking to an LVMPD official. And they told me that after the massacre, LVMPD SWAT team was at a training seminar, and there were some cops from, I think they were from Texas, SWAT guys, and they said that had that Route 91 festival occurred at their jurisdiction, their protocol is to have counter snipers available at all these events, okay, even before the Las Vegas massacre. So, and that was the thing with me. Why didn't they have counter snipers standing by? Maybe they could have counted. Remember, Paddock fired out that window for 10 to 12 minutes unimpeded. No police officer ever fired back at him or tried to stop him. And like I said, we can do a whole other podcast, a whole bunch of stuff I want to talk about that we don't have the time to talk about it.
Yeah, if I can get you to come back, that would be great. We'll do a whole nother hour just on Paddock. But like you said, the Strip it's a soft target. You know, it really is. And there's a lot of stuff you could do there without 1,000 guns, you know. There's a lot of stuff you could do to hit those casinos. I don't want to give anybody ideas, but there's all kinds of, for a very little budget. You know, it wouldn't take a lot of manpower, wouldn't take a lot of budget to really do a lot of damage on that Strip. So, and I don't know how you could, what are you going to do? Do you know, like
You can screen baggage, and you can. They don't want to spend the money to do that. And worse than that is they don't want to hassle the guest. They don't want to hassle the high rollers. Like when you come into our hotel now, if you have bags of certain sizes or something, you have to put them through this thing, and it's going to go through a machine or an X-ray machine or something like that. They do it at airports, for Christ's sake. I work for TSA at the airport. You know, I think down the road, some of them may have it now. I don't know, but you will see that. You know, I can tell you this, God forbid another incident happens, and I hope I'm never alive to see it, on the Strip like this, it'll definitely happen. But, you know, they should be prepared for this right now. And like I said, when I did a podcast and 2 stories for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, it was told that the LVMPD response was a disgrace. And their after-action report. Matter of fact, how many minutes we got here?
We got about close to 10.
Okay. Listen to this. Okay. I was Detective of the Year in 1986. I was a pretty good investigator. I was undercover, even when I was doing investigations in the private sector. Okay, when the preliminary and the final police reports came out, I slammed them in a lot of articles. There was mistakes in there that should never ever have been put in there. Like, and I don't have it in front of me. There was one entry where they said Paddock was in the casino from, I think, 6 a.m. continuously to 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning. Okay? Well, I was doing research on this, and I was investigating all this, and I found out that the date that they said that, it wasn't. How could that be? Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody was accessing his room door with his room key. So if he was continually, now, if this was a mistake, and they didn't see it. Nobody vetted the final report, but that's in the final report. And then you know, you look at the videotape and you look at the lock interrogation report for that day, and I'm like, well, holy crap! Here it says he's continuously playing from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning, and I'm looking at a lock interrogation report where his room's being accessed at 2 to 2:30 in the morning. So I did a story on that, and then there was another entry. There's a lot of them. There was another entry where they said on this day, Paddock brought luggage by himself to his room, okay? And then within the next page or something, they're talking about that same incident, and it says, on this day, the bellman knocked on Paddock's door to bring in more luggage, and Paddock answered the door. All right, so which is it, guys? Did he bring it in by himself on this day, or was the bellman? You know, I mean, you don't make mistakes like that in the biggest homicide investigation in the history of Las Vegas, LVMPD, and the worst mass shooting in American history. And I blasted them on that. Like, did anybody vet? And there's more stuff in there. You can go back and look at the different articles and stuff that I posted. And then we had the big one. I blasted them on this. When the detective who's getting the telephonic search warrant that morning, because they had to get a search warrant to go in and look at the room and stuff, because they didn't know at that time if Paddock was acted alone or not. You don't know at that time. So he tells the judge on the telephonic search warrant that when the officers breached the door, they observed Paddock commit suicide. That was in his search warrant. And that turned out to be a bunch of BS. And when they had the news conference out here, and I was not allowed to go to the news conference. The police department would not issue me police credentials to go to when I was writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner to go to these press conferences. So I couldn't get in. But the media was there at this one, and they asked this. He's now retired. I don't remember, it was a sergeant that did this, and he said, "Oh, you know, it was hectic that night. That's the way things go," something like that. And they took it back. "Oh, yeah, we understand, lesson." And I said, "BS, people, because the reporters out here, there's no reporters in Las Vegas that I know of that are former cops that have criminal investigative experience. That's why a lot of times the police department just runs over them at these press conferences." And I said, had I been there, I would have said, wait a minute, Sergeant, okay? You're doing a search warrant on a room in a crime scene for the worst mass shooting in American history. Who are the cops that told you that they witnessed Paddock commit suicide? He wouldn't be able to answer because no cop ever told him that. And he said, "Oh, you know, it was hectic. I was getting information from this." Well, you know what? You don't put hearsay and BS information as probable cause in a search warrant. But, of course, the lawyers, the news media out here didn't know that. So they didn't challenge them, and I did a big story on it. It was just, just a lot of mistakes like that as an ex-cop and as ex-investigator gets under my skin. But overall, and I said this in stories, the police officers from the LVMPD and private citizens who were in that disaster, that it was terrifying, saved a lot of lives that night. And had they not been there, a lot more people would have died. And so hopefully, they've expanded and learned from this. But it's sad they had to learn from this when they should have had what they should have had in place before the Las Vegas massacre, and didn't. That's a disgrace. That's a disgrace about this. So.
Some of the things you mentioned there about the changing the story and with the search warrant. What about the Millers? Did you ever look into the Millers and the CC Pizza and the Walmart shooting there?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's funny you brought that up. I just posted something a week ago because June 8th was the anniversary of Igor Soldo, and Alan Beck. I knew Alan Beck, and then Mr. Walton, the citizen that was killed. And I did a short podcast I do every year and put it out there. And you get back to Jared Miller, and there's another thing that never been explained. He was out at the Bundy Ranch. He's a convicted felon, okay? He was out at the Bundy Ranch, and I found photographs and video where he was being interviewed by Al Jazeera, and while they interview him, he's got an AK-47 type rifle around his neck. Now, my thing is, where did that come from? He was out at the Bundy Ranch because a couple of weeks before they assassinated the two police officers and then killed Mr. Walton, who tried to stop him. He was the guy with the CC concealed weapons permit, and tried to stop Jared. He didn't know the wife was behind him, and the wife shot him inside Walmart after they left CC's Pizza. And I have these texts. I still have them. He was on social media, Jared Miller, asking people, where can I get a rifle? Where can I get a rifle? Anybody can show me where I get a rifle? He's a convicted felon. But there is video out there. And I even called up the Homeland Security Bureau many years ago after that happened and told them they were unaware of that video because I was on the phone with the CT detective. And I told my wife, I said, listen, I'll send you the video. He said, send me the video. Because when he was at the Bundy Ranch being interviewed by Al Jazeera, Jared Miller, and I have that video, he has the AK-47 across his back, with the sling on it.
Well, Doug, did you know that he was at the Million Mask March, and he was also at Occupy Wall Street, and that he's the one up at Bundy Ranch who started the rumor about the impending drone attack that was coming, that caused the whole with the Oath Keepers and the 1%ers pulling guns on each other. He caused that.
Oh, you just said something.
Yeah.
With the Oath Keepers, because of all the stuff that went on with January 6th, was disbanded. Yeah. Stuart Rhodes, that crazy guy's in jail for 18 in federal prison.
Yeah, he interviewed his wife and his son, yeah.
Well, do you know that the new Oath Keepers, called Oath Keepers USA, the president and founder is a retired LVMPD detective who lives in Utah?
You told me this last time. We were talking about so much stuff.
I posted on Twitter. I mean, this guy's out there, and you look at some of his tweets. He put a tweet out, this guy,
a
couple of weeks ago, and he says, I'm looking for 1 million people to follow me, and we need to take action. The same anti-government nonsense. He's a retired LVMP detective. He's now the president and founder of Oath Keepers USA. He's out of Utah. And I have seen nothing in the national media of anybody talking about, wow, there's a new Oath Keepers out, and the guy's a retired detective, and look at his tweets. His tweets are disturbing to me. He's on Twitter, Anyway, man, we could talk for hours.
Oh, no, yeah. We're definitely going to have you come back. As soon as we get off the air, let's come up with a day to come back. We'll finish up on Pollock. And then the Millers, we got to do a whole show on that in one day, man. Doug Poppa podcast. You can find him on the Baltimore Post Examiner, too. He's a frequent contributor there, too, as well. And, Doug, they're going to find your podcast on YouTube and all the podcast platforms?
Yes. If you go to the YouTube channel, it's the Doug Poppa podcast. I also have Twitter, at Doug Poppa1. I put a lot of stuff on my Twitter. And then I also have my podcast. The audio versions are also on iHeartRadio and Spotify and some other platforms. But the predominant site is the YouTube channel, the Doug Poppa Podcast, and my Twitter account, at Doug Poppa1. You'll see a lot of stuff. And I just posted some stuff on some stories I just done on Metro within the past couple of weeks. And I have some more stuff coming out on other stuff I'm working on.
Excellent stuff, Doug Poppa. I'll shoot you an email after the show, okay? We'll come up with a part 2 on Stephen Paddock.
No problem.
Thank you, my friend.
All right, man. Nice
Good
to be
night.
with you.